Welcome to Elected, a podcast for women and our active accomplices in and around politics. I'm your host, Sarah Elder-Chamanara, and today my guest is Sabrina Grover, and she's actually sitting across from me, which is nice.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. And you have a special guest here.
I do. I brought my little friend, my little dog friend, Bear.
Hi, Bear.
He's got a festive collar and everything. He's ready for Christmas.
And what type of dog is Bear?
Bear is a Boston Terrier pug.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
It's very cute. He's not my dog. He's my dog nephew.
Well, we just talked about you wanting to
steal him,
which I said, don't do.
I'm not going to.
Can you imagine if there was a political candidate who was like involved in a scandal stealing a dog? Do you think that what kind of viability would they have after that? Could they come back from that?
Like better or worse than like drinking and driving or a hit and run? Like where do we think it lands on the political
spectrum of
scale
of scandals?
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like it depends on, is it because there is a different standard of testing for this kind of thing?
Yeah.
On the left and the right.
True.
So on the left, this would take someone down. On the right, it might actually win votes.
They'd be like, freedom. That dog chose to go with you.
Exactly.
This
episode is already going in interesting places.
Yeah.
Yes. And unlike any other. So that's great. Okay.
That's how it should always be.
It should always be like that. So before we get into any more conversation, in the spirit of reconciliation, it's important for me to share my personal commitment to learning the history of colonialism and the ongoing systemic violence and oppression against Indigenous peoples. The land where I live, actually we live, work, and where I record from is the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, the Kainai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, Stoney Nakoda Nations, Métis Nation Region 3, and all people who make their homes in Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. So, okay. Well, I feel like we've already gotten really political really fast.
That happens with us, Sarah.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you bring two political people together
in a political store,
in a political place,
with a
political dog.
With a political dog. You're right. Bear has been on campaign since he was just a little puppy.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He was door knocking at 5 months old.
5 months old.
5 months.
I mean, I fully support dogs being involved in political campaigns because also, as a therapeutic aspect, just having a dog around
makes you feel so much calmer.
Stress reliever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Though, one of the biggest things when you door knock is dealing with the dogs that open the door.
Oh,
and so then you've got 2 dogs and it's chaos.
Yeah. And some humans who have dogs. I'm always reluctant to say like owner because I don't feel like that's not the relationship I want with my dog. Is that because she's my first child?
Yeah, you're a dog mom.
Talk about owning my children. So she's my dog, right?
Yeah,
no, because that would sound horrible.
Yeah, that's true.
So I don't I love my children and I love my pup. So
that's very millennial of you.
They're like I love them all. So, anyways. Okay, this is not an episode about dogs.
No, it's not.
It's kind of like, if there was but I feel like maybe there should be more political podcasts with dogs.
I think it'd be funny.
It's better than sports.
I think so.
I think a lot of people would actually.
Maybe.
Yeah. Okay, so there's so much to talk about. So let's talk about your most recent campaign experience. Can you share what that was?
Yeah. So I recently just got back to Alberta from Ottawa, where I was for a couple of months helping elect the new mayor, Mark Sutcliffe. So it was a wild experience. It was my first experience as a campaign manager, which I think is really exciting that we're seeing a lot more young women of color be put in some really powerful positions. I was just thinking and reflecting on Harnoor, who ran Amarjeet Sohi's campaign last year, again, a young woman of color doing some really exciting things.
Yeah.
And it was a great campaign. One of the things about municipal campaigns that I find more and more interesting, especially being partisan myself, is how you really can cross over on that partisan relationship and that there are lots of people on all sides of the spectrum that you have a lot more in common with than you would think if you kind of break through that partisan mold and just stop thinking that way, left, right, liberal, conservative, NDP for 5 minutes. And there's a lot of bridges to be built and a lot of like relationships to be made that effectively can win a campaign or can transform politics and policies.
So, and having never lived in Ottawa, they don't have there are no party politics in Ottawa municipal politics.
That's right.
So, formally.
Not even informally.
Oh, okay.
Say. Yeah. So Ottawa is, so interestingly enough, Ottawa is like 3.5 times the physical size of Calgary. They have, but around just under our population. So like maybe 1.1.
Okay.
24 wards.
Okay.
So yeah, you're talking 3.5 times the size of us and almost double the number of wards that we have here.
Interesting.
No political parties, but the interesting part of Ottawa is that it was several towns that was amalgamated like 2.5 decades ago.
Interesting.
So that is, I think, what's really, really fascinating about politics there is that it's bringing together urban, rural, and suburban in a way that you don't see most other places in Canada. It's a very like Ontario phenomenon to have this many amalgamated towns kind of come into one municipality.
Interesting. And one of the things that I heard when I was following the coverage of the Ottawa election, municipal election, was that a lot of it is actually rural.
A huge part of it is rural.
And that the way it kind of shook out was that to your campaign's benefit was that you won those areas.
Yeah. So I think like from our campaign perspective, one of the things, I lived in Ottawa for 4 years and I lived in downtown Ottawa and I led a little like downtown political life and I went to Parliament Hill and I went to receptions. And when you live that life, you don't really get the essence of what the city is. That's really just one aspect of the city. And despite the fact that, most of the city works for public service or ends up working in politics or somewhat politics adjacent, where people live and where people raise their families is quite different than like the vicinity of like Parliament Hill or the parliamentary precinct. And so that's something that I think our campaign really understood and that we spoke to those people. And the other thing is, our campaign slogan was a mayor for all of Ottawa. And one of the reasons that became the slogan and it really came from talking to people, from door knocking, is that people still felt the pre-amalgamation days. So if they live in Orleans or they live in Nepean, they're not, or they live in Metcalfe, which is like the rural areas, they're not feeling part of Ottawa. They're not getting that sense that you get when you're downtown. You're like, oh, this is Ottawa. And so that was really important to the campaign. It was to speak to the whole city because at this point, we are amalgamated. It is one city. So how do we develop for that? How do we build for that? And how do we make sure that all parts of that city are embraced, right? Whether I think when most Canadians think Ottawa, they think Parliament Hill, but they should also think Richmond Fair or the Carp Fair or, having big dairy farms. And I think that's really important to those people who live there. And that's what a mayor should do, is embrace that. So
I agree. But also from a political perspective, like you have to win votes in
Yeah.
all areas, right?
Yeah.
Not just one, which I mean, for me, not being in Ottawa during it's been a long time since I've been to Ottawa. But so the only way that I had a gauge for what was happening was on Twitter. And obviously Twitter is not representative of what's happening on the ground. But on Twitter, I would say it seemed like the person who came second, Catherine McKenney, was winning.
Yeah.
But you actually won like
pretty handedly,
pretty decisively. So it's interesting. Like, how did you manage that aspect of like on Twitter, it seemed to be one reality, but on the ground and in the day-to-day, it was another.
I think that's a really important lesson I learned from this campaign. And I think that we've been slowly learning over the last decade. So if you look at Nenshi's campaign in 2010, the first campaign, obviously highly won through social media engagement. It was grassroots, it was organic, it was exciting, it was different. That's not what Twitter is anymore. Twitter is a hellscape. And I say that being on it regularly. But for the majority of this campaign, even I was shut down Twitter. I don't care what's on it. The only thing I want to know is what somebody at the door is telling me, or somebody at a Costco parking lot is telling me, or somebody at the Richmond Fair is telling me. And at the end of the day, Twitter is a echo chamber that's a self-curated echo chamber because it's about who you follow. And that's never been more obvious than it is in politics as of right now, more so than it's ever been before, even in the 2012 campaign, even in the last few years, it's just really worsened. And most people, if you have a kid or you have a family or you have two jobs because you're trying to make ends meet, I can assure you that at the end of the day, you're not logging onto Twitter. And for campaigns to continue to use Twitter as their gauge for whether or not they are winning is not effective and isn't going to win them that campaign anymore. And so that tried and true, get out, knock on people's doors and speak to actual human beings outside of your keyboard continues to be the most important part of a campaign.
Yeah.
And I think for us, we ran a campaign for 24 wards, and we knew that we needed to run a campaign for 24 wards to win. And there wasn't a way to run a campaign for part of the city that was going to garner you a victory.
And endorsements kind of, were a big deal on the, as you described it, hellscape of Twitter, which I agree with. How did endorsements translate at the doors from what you were hearing from voters?
I think endorsements really tend to be a politically elite avenue of campaigning. The thing about Ottawa is that it is a very, very smart political city, from public service to bureaucracy to ministers' offices to former ministers to former political staff to former bureaucrats. So no matter where you live in Ottawa, it is very informed. It's quite different than other cities in Canada because it doesn't have, most other cities don't have quite a high concentration of politically involved jobs. And so in that context, I think it was really important because it added a lot of credibility. But at the end of the day, I think it is a bit of a political elite mentality, because the only thing somebody wants to know is, what are you going to do for me? And so who cares if an MP endorses you, or a former MP endorses you, or a deputy minister, or the parliamentary budget officer? At the end of the day, that doesn't matter to an average person. They might think, oh, that's interesting. And oh, I respect that person's opinion. But what's Mark going to do for me? Because I have snow that isn't being removed, and I really need this, part of this road infrastructure to be built. So it's going to cut 10 minutes off of my commute. And I really need to make sure that, the garbage is being picked up because that's really annoying to me. And it's annoying that it only happens two days or every 2 weeks. So that's, I think, the most important part of running a campaign, is talking about what you're going to do for the actual people that live there.
Mm-hmm. And having those conversations to understand what people actually care about is what gets votes.
Exactly. And I think one of the things that this campaign, so this is the first time Ottawa had a choice in, I think, 12 years where Jim Watson didn't run again. And when you have an incumbent like Jim Watson, it's somebody who's very, very likely to win and had been winning. And so it's a wide open field. You had somebody who was politically experienced, Catherine McKinney. You had somebody who is a political novice, Mark Sutcliffe. The thing about this campaign that I think really struck me and like is becoming more and more in politics in the last like 2 to 3 years is how vicious it became. And when you talk about ordinary people thinking about whether or not they'll get engaged in politics, some of the experiences that we had on the team, or that, I think the insults that were thrown at Mark were pretty brutal. And in a way that's like, why are people getting involved in this?
I think that's a really important question because, like obviously you and I think anyone listening will know and understand why we need more people, good people, more diversity in politics. But at the same time, what are we asking people to get involved with? Because I've said that I don't want to run. You have run. I like, and someone else had said to me, like, if you and I, she was saying this about herself and me. She was like, if you and I understand kind of the ins and outs of, how things work and, and are really involved in politics, and we don't want to run, how can we ask other people to, knowing what it's like? And that's like a really tricky question. Also, with the call, obviously through Madam Premier, is like that we need more women and marginalized people in politics. How do you set them up for success?
Yeah.
Because taking someone who is unprepared to face the vitriol that they will face, and the nasty comments and the very personal nature of it, if you don't give them a very like honest overview of what this is going to be like and only focus on, the good stuff, will they survive?
And I don't want to say like, and I think that Catherine equally has received a number of vicious comments over the course of their political lives, their political career. I think that one of the things with diversity that's really important, becoming more and more important to me, is I obviously support more women being elected, more gender diverse people being elected, more marginalized people being elected. But I think it's almost as important to have all of these folks working in the system as well. And so, we took a lot of heat on our campaign because people perceived Mark as a status quo, basic white guy. And, I guess you can give that criticism, but I think you can't just disregard people for face value, what you think they are, without digging into their policies, ideas, or their hard work or their community work. But at the end of the day, we also had a team of 6 women run the campaign. I was a campaign manager. Our deputy campaign manager was a woman. Our chief comms person was a woman. One of our chief fundraising officers was a woman. Like, that's also important. It's also important to know that women are making politics happen, not just from running, but behind the scenes. And behind the scenes are some of the most powerful people in this country. Like, if you don't think Katie Telford is just as powerful as Justin Trudeau, then you do not know what Katie Telford is all about.
And you also don't understand how politics works.
Exactly.
Because she is a powerful individual. And I completely agree. So it's not just about having women run, but also like, behind the scenes, because as you and I both know, those campaigns are still overwhelmingly dominated by men. And, I have thought about it, I've said it's like, on campaigns, there are people who want to be indoor cats. And those are the people who usually show up knowing the least, but having the most confidence. And they traditionally are men. And then there are the people who go out and are engaging with voters. And they don't necessarily want to go out and do those jobs because they want to stay inside.
Yeah.
And there has to be, and there is, I think, a really great shift happening right now in terms of like who are those indoor cats.
Yeah.
And but also on the public facing front. So yeah, it's about everything at all levels.
And I think that also changes like the nastiness level of politics as well, right? The more you have a diversity of people running campaigns, the different opinions that they're going to bring to how you do communications. And they might be more critical, and they might bring a more critical eye to saying like, oh, actually, we probably shouldn't engage in politics in that way. And let's think about, this nuance, or let's think about this diversity. And that's really, really important. Because it's not the candidate at the end of the day that's running a campaign themselves. It's the team behind them that's going to direct what happens. And I think that is really, really important. That's why I brought up Hernor at the beginning and myself. Like, it's very cool that young women are doing these things. And it's very cool in 2015 that we had 3 female campaign managers lead the national parties. That's important. And we need to celebrate those women as much as we celebrate women who are elected.
Well, okay. And so this is so when we talk about celebrating, because I talked about celebrating recently and it sparked some pretty swift backlash. So when we talk about celebrating, so someone who has an opposite political ideological position to you, can you still celebrate the fact that a woman is in that space without agreeing with their politics?
I think so, because I think that at the end of the day, more women across all of the spectrums is what's important. So if I'm personally a liberal, can I celebrate conservative women? Of course, because at the end of the day, the more women that are involved in politics on the conservative side, it's important because it'll transform the party. And I think that we do ourselves a disservice when we decide to attack each other as opposed to celebrating the accomplishments of people moving forward. And you can vehemently disagree with someone's policies, and you can say that all of these policies are terrible. This is the worst thing that we could have in terms of being elected and in terms of, moving our issues forward. But women deserve that criticism too.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing. So you can't shy away from criticizing women who are running bad policies. But you also don't need to be vicious at bringing them down because they're women. And surprise, not all women are going to be in it for fighting on women's issues.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really big, important lesson that we've learned. And we should acknowledge that.
Yeah. And even this weekend, so I was doing a market and I met who I actually think I might have said, I was like, you're a total badass. This woman, a single mom, farmer, small business owner, politically aware. And her stance was, I actually don't describe myself as a feminist. And she was like, and I want actually men to lead. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, this is interesting. Given, her circumstances and everything that she shared with me. And I was like, how can we have a conversation that maybe that so I can still learn from what you're saying, but maybe you can also learn about me and what I'm saying and open up your viewpoint to understand that there are systemic things that have limited you and why your views actually might be harmful.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's what I think is really important. And that's why it's important to have conversations. And, as I mentioned, it was interesting being so involved on a municipal campaign where in a highly political city where we could break down those partisan barriers, because
you have to win votes.
You have to win votes on
all sides.
Right. And again, at the end of the day, people care about how issues affect them. And it's the political class, and it's up to us for framing it in a left or right or conservative or liberal kind of mentality. But at the end of the day, you still have to explain it to people who aren't thinking about that every day. And it's okay to have conversations with the other side and to break down those barriers. And, I remember one time on my campaign, I have a lot of conservative friends. And somebody said to me, well, how can you be friends with those people? And I said, That attitude is what's going to worsen the toxicity of politics. Instead of saying, how can you be friends with those people? Think about, Ken Bosenkohl says this all the time. Think about something that you have in common with that other person that isn't political. And rest assured, you have lots of things in common and you can talk about a lot of things that aren't political. And even if politics matters so immensely to you, you still have to reach out and like think about people as people.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I feel this, one of the many things that I have running in my head constantly 24/7 is this, because I feel like the political discourse and the way that political parties, specifically here in Alberta, are pushing us is that you're on my team or you're against me.
Yeah.
And I
agree.
Fundamentally reject that because that's not how things actually get done. So say you're an opposition MLA and your constituent who has like a very worthwhile project or something, say they need access to a medicine, for example, that's not currently funded. And you go to your opposition MLA and say like, oh, I want to meet with you and this is why I need this drug. And will you help me advocate to have this medicine funded, for example? And can you imagine if that opposition politician says, actually, sorry, no, because I don't agree with the government and therefore I will not work with them. So
yeah, exactly. Like there's just so many instances where you have to work across party lines, where you have to cooperate, where you have to, question period often I think tends to be a show when people work behind the scenes. But at the end of the day, I think finding that common ground amongst people who aren't, at the end of the day, most people aren't political. And even though politics affects their daily lives and we're trying to make them political parties are turning those people away from politics in the sense that political parties aren't, because it's becoming such an us versus them. A lot of people don't want to be in an us versus them. They want to learn about your policies and they want to be aligned with you and they want to be interested, but it's not going to be their whole lives. And so you have to be able to accept that most people are somewhere in the center or somewhere in a spectrum. And maybe they're on the right on one issue, they're on the left on another issue. And how do we talk to those people in a way that's a little bit more human and a little bit more real and a little bit less divisive?
Well, I talk to a lot of people on a daily basis about, and I have pretty political conversations. Yeah. And I would say that most people are there. There's a good chunk of people who right now are really turned off by what's happening. And I completely agree with them because I think that ultimately, political parties on any side of the spectrum are doing, they all want to raise money. They all send the emails. They all do their things. They all have their machines working. But right now I find it's only in service of their own agendas. And I think that people are the losers in this equation. Like Albertans are the losers.
Yeah. I think that there's a conversation to be had about how we bring people back into civic engagement or civic duty, a sense of that. Because as I mentioned, even though I would say most people aren't political, politics affects your life every day.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter who you are. Anything that is happening in our halls of government is literally affecting your life, whether it's slightly more taxes, whether it's
how often your garbage gets picked up,
whether it's building the Green Line,
the experiences,
Green Line.
Yeah. Your experiences with your kids at school. Everything.
Yeah. Potholes, taking your kids to hockey. Is there enough recreation that's being,
is your ice time at 11 o'clock at night for a 7-year-old because there isn't enough access?
All of that is political and people don't get that. And that's fine because it's not for everybody to be able to link their individual issues to politics, but they should be linking them in a sense of civic duty and civic engagement because voter apathy is so high.
Okay.
And people are being turned away. And I think in the provincial Ontario election was 39% of people voted, an embarrassingly low amount of people.
Elections are decided by people who stay at home. I
100%.
say it often, and I say it I was going to say, that's what I remember. I've said I'll never run, but if I do, I'm going to have the wonkiest platform in the history of the world, because my platform will be around things like engagement and my platform will seriously be things like starting a public awareness campaign around, how beneficial it is to wave at people. Like, honestly, it's going to be so weird.
I love that.
But
what level of government are you running for?
I don't even know. It doesn't even matter. Waving can be at any level.
True. Yeah. Okay.
But really core things around how to be a better person. That is what I would want to run my campaign on. And I obviously know that's very
that could be a Twitter campaign. I think a lot of people on Twitter could learn how to be better people.
I don't know. I see this as being even just as kind of like a disruption into the normal politics of, imagine I'm in a debate, right? And, all the people going back and forth, and I'll be like, can we say something nice about each other? Or, I don't know.
We actually had to do that in the Ottawa campaign. The candidates had to say something nice about each other. And I was like, I love that. That's good. Because surely you respect each other.
I saw an example of it in the States, actually. And I think maybe I was it in Georgia. But two candidates who were going super hard, where there's hundreds of millions of dollars at stake. And they were still able to find something nice to say about each other.
Well, at the end of the day, there's so few people who are really interested in politics and political careers and being invested in the system, that we all have a commonality about us just from that.
Yeah.
And, it's that I think is important. It's you should have a level of respect for all these people, even if you hate their policies and you think their ideas are stupid.
You don't have to vote for them.
You don't have to vote for them. And you can totally fine to say your ideas are stupid.
Yeah. And you can say, not only am I not going to vote for you, but I am actively going to campaign against you.
Exactly.
But that being said, I don't think that, for me, I see when we are still equity seeking groups, you cannot deny the equity of someone else to be in that space. Disagree with them, don't vote for them, run, the hardest campaign you can against them, criticize their policies, everything, go against them.
Yeah.
But to say you can't be involved in politics, that's something else.
And also to just there's a level of respect that I think we need to restore, right? I don't think politics has always been this way. And I think a lot of that has to do with social media and it just being very easy to be a keyboard warrior. I mean, I'm not the first person to say it, obviously, but I think there's a level of respect that needs to be restored amongst people who work in politics. And that I think is important for the integrity of our system and the integrity of democracy.
Agreed.
Because if you can't respect the rules and you can't respect the basis in which we're all engaging in, then you get anarchy, aka Donald Trump.
Well, and so
maybe a little bit of Alberta right now.
So a pet issue of mine is, I have a lot of pet issues. No offense.
Not actual pet issues.
Not to the pet issue, it's to the pet in our presence. Is that when someone says that's not my premier, that's not my prime minister, which we've saw in the States, this has definitely come across the border. For example, I don't support the premier in Alberta at all. I don't agree with her. I do not support her politics at all. But do I acknowledge that she's the premier of my province, even though I didn't vote for her and all of the things that go along with how she is now in this position? She's still my premier. And I find that when someone says, oh, that's not my prime minister, and most commonly we hear that about people saying that about, Trudeau, he's not my prime minister. Yes, he is. And I actually think that when we say those kinds of things, it actually undermines the systems, the institutions, and our democracy.
Oh, yeah.
Because you're delegitimizing our system of government.
It's what has allowed those people to think that they can just overthrow the government.
Exactly.
And it's other countries in the world, you've raised this a lot, Sarah, other countries in the world are literally fighting to the death for their basic human and democratic rights.
Well, Iran is my number one example because that's my family's, where my husband is from, and being a dual citizen of that country. And, just yesterday, Iran hung the second protester. Let's have that conversation. Who in Canada is dying for their right to protest? No one.
Exactly.
No one would ever be put to death for that. But, a sham trial, a sham system of justice, even just saying this puts me in jeopardy going back to Iran. No one has that happen here.
And who is dying in transition of government?
No one.
Who's even protesting a transition of government? If, Danielle Smith won this leadership and she became premier, nobody died in the protesting of her transition, and nobody will. But to say, as you say, like, this is not my premier, or we need to like overthrow, or we need to get rid of these extremists, all this crazy stuff is like, that's not democratic language. That's not language that we use for civic engagement here. We have a system of government. We have a system of rights and rules and regulations, and that is the basis of our democracy. And that's how we get things done.
But that's also how we change things.
That's how we change things.
We change things when there's something that we don't agree with. We all have the ability to share that in whatever way. But also we have the opportunity to take part in free and fair and transparent elections, which is also something that a lot of countries around the world don't get to do. And so, tell me more about your quest for freedom, because there are actually people who are dying for those same freedoms that we take for granted.
For freedoms even less than that.
Yeah. Like your freedom to get, a latte without wearing a mask.
Yeah.
Right. Like, really?
Yeah. Well, and I think, back to your earlier point of like, not my premier, not my choice. One of the things that I was part of the PCs back in 2015 when we lost, and, it was a lot of self-reflection on like losing and what that meant, about the party and where politics was. But one of the things that annoyed me, but, I accepted it as a loss. One of the things that really annoyed me throughout the conversation, the dialogue between 2015 and 2019 was people, notably our former premier, saying that voters made a mistake. That is offensive to the system of government that we have. Voters do not make a mistake. So you can disagree with you can be upset at the outcome, but you cannot disagree with voters electing or diselecting your government. And I think that's what's really important in terms of like just a base level of respect. You stop disrespecting the people that are getting you elected or throwing you out.
Yeah, I've said that I do think voters can get it wrong, based on the information at hand. Let's use, for example, I live here in Calgary in Ward 4, where I have a city councillor who alleged allegations came out about him after early voting. So if those things had, would that have changed the outcome of the election? So it's not necessarily that voters got it wrong. It's what information did they have when they were making that decision at the time?
Yeah. And I agree with that.
That being said, I also think that, maybe I'm evolving actually in real time on this, in shaping or reevaluating or repositioning on this, because I think you're right. And this is a good conversation to have, because it's not that voters, it was what information did they have and how did the system either support or fail them in making those decisions? Right. So it's not the people, it's a system. It's the system.
Right. Okay. And like, we've had a really challenging, I agree with you. Like, I think it's been an extraordinarily challenge to resolve this issue of diselecting this person, who has clearly been morally reprehensible.
Yeah.
Like the only way I guess you could put it. And like, yeah, so what's the system on getting that person out because they've done those actions? Now we can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
So that I think is what's important is like, how do we create systems that do allow for us to address those issues in a way that's fair? It's like really, really challenging,
But also
obviously.
the systems in which, how do we make sure that when people are taking part, when they go to vote, that they have as much information as possible and are set up to make the best choices possible, whatever those may be, as that it's informed and that they're engaged and they're not just saying, you know, I'm voting this way because my family has voted this way forever, or, you know, someone told me to vote this way, or, you know, like whatever. Those are the systems that need to change. Okay, this is a new plank in my campaign.
Yeah, there you go.
My non-existent campaign.
Your civic engagement, be a good human campaign.
Yeah. So, I mean, also I'm going to bring back stickers.
Stickers.
I mean, if I ran municipally, actually, you know what? At any level, you get an I voted sticker.
Don't you get those now?
Not municipally.
Oh,
not in the last election, I believe.
We did in Ottawa.
That's why I made buttons to hand out to people if you came into the store. And
I love an
I
voted sticker.
I made a button.
And I love incentives for voting, like ice cream. I mean, I'm going to vote anyways because I'm political, but
yeah,
no, it's cute.
Yeah. So anyways,
take your I voted sticker.
My platform for my non-existent campaign is evolving.
I'm interested to see how this evolves over the course of maybe the next year. I'm not even sure what campaign you're going to run in.
Well, it's imaginary. So
it's imaginary.
It could be any day.
Maybe it could be a fake campaign here at Madam Premier.
Well, you know, interestingly,
just a social campaign.
When I actually, it was before I lived in Victoria, but when I still lived in BC, there was raw sewage being pumped out into the ocean on Vancouver Island. Ooh. Was a very real issue. It was happening up until very recently.
Yes.
With the new construction of sewage treatment plants, which in itself was highly controversial. So the construction of those plants, and you're like, where is she going with this? Yeah. Because there were actually people who advocated for the continued pumping out of this raw sewage into the ocean.
Oh,
against progressive people, against the creation of these sewage treatment plants. But there was a disruptor in this, and it was like around, I'm going to say like 2005-ish, 2006, maybe. There was a man who ran, his name was Mr. Floaty. And he dressed up as poop.
Okay.
And he was a single issue candidate in bringing attention to the need for
to not do this anymore.
Not to pump raw sewage into the ocean.
You know what? Good for him.
He's my inspiration.
He's like, yeah, he's that. I like that. I like that.
You're just not about sewage treatment.
And he knew he wasn't going to win, probably.
Well, no, and that wasn't the point.
That's what I'm saying. Like he was just like raising awareness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and he even like had a voice. I would run as myself. I wouldn't wear a costume.
You would not.
I would use my real voice. You would not
wear a suit costume.
No, I wouldn't, because again, my issue wouldn't be sanitation.
Right.
But
but good for him.
Yeah.
I like that.
I know. I mean, he probably never knew that he was going to be talked about on a podcast in 2022.
Poop man.
Mr. Floaty. Come on.
Sorry, Mr. Floaty.
Decent. Let's be decent about this.
Mr. Floaty.
Mr. Floaty.
Okay.
Yeah.
Poop man's not a bad.
I mean,
surely there's a business named Poop Man.
From a branding perspective, I think Mr. Floaty is better than that.
I'm not going to disagree with you.
This conversation has gone, and like, it's been an amazing conversation. Maybe we should wrap it up with something else other than talking about sewage.
And it's like 10 o'clock in the morning. Like, we don't even have wine.
I don't even know what time it is anymore.
Yeah.
Well, maybe tell me something that is going to surprise me about politics.
Oh, surprise you.
Yeah. Do you have anything? Because I feel like we need to end this differently than.
There's not a lot that's surprising anymore for me.
Okay.
I mean, where policies are going is like pretty radical, I feel like. But I don't know that I'm surprised by it. Like, I think a lot of what we're seeing, you could predict the trajectory of where things are going, and we can kind of predict the trajectory of things, 5 or 6 years down.
Even 6 months.
Yeah.
In the context of a provincial election.
Yeah. So it's like, things aren't really exciting or unpredictable anymore, but the apathy is growing a surprising amount, and people are just disengaging, which is so unfortunate.
Well, it should be the opposite of what we want.
Yeah.
Right. And it should be the opposite of what political parties want to.
Completely. But political parties, I think, are almost like two in their own heads now.
Well,
to
and they
really be effective at mitigating that. And I think it's up to people who are politically engaged or politically adjacent, who have a civic mindedness or who are civically aware, to, I think, start that conversation. Like, you know what? Have it at the dinner table at Thanksgiving. Do not shy away from politics. Talk about it. Get feisty, get angry, because that's the only way people will maybe listen or maybe have an opinion that's more than just, oh, I don't care about politics. Oh, I don't talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah. There's still too much about that.
Way too much.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's like much like happening that's like unpredictable or something that I wouldn't be aware of. But I think what is exciting is the number of younger, diverse people that are like throwing their hats in head first. Like even on Catherine McKinney's campaign, I think the deputy campaign manager was also a young woman of color. Like it's becoming pretty prominent that people are not being afraid to claim space and to take up the space that they feel that they deserve, and that they are really entitled to in terms of making a difference. And I think that's great.
I agree with you. I think that is a lovely place to leave this episode. So,
yeah. Be feisty.
Yeah. Be feisty.
Maybe we should put that on a t-shirt.
Says Sabrina Grover. Yeah.
It's my new motto. It's going to be my campaign motto.
Be feisty. Well, maybe if you get a dog, you could name it Feisty.
Oh, yeah. That's a cute name.
Feisty.
Feisty. How do you like that?
Feisty Grover.
That's not your name. Feisty Grover. I like it.
Maybe they need a middle name. We can think about that. We can end this episode.
Yeah. That's for future.
That's for future conversations.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining me.
And thank you for having me.
And for the kisses from the pup. Oh yeah, it is so cute.
So
and
cute.
I definitely talk to dogs like with a baby voice. I don't talk to
like that.
I've never talked to my children really
in a baby voice.
No, I would try to actually do the opposite because I wanted to just, talk to them. But I talk to my dog, like I talk to puppies.
I think if you talk to them in a baby voice, then when you're like angry and serious about something, then they listen to you.
Maybe that's why my kids don't listen to me.
Yeah. They're like, that's just her normal voice.
Yeah. It's like just mom, just being mom.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, thank you to you and your special guest. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.